everybody, so welcome to the first of my 2022 videos that are made especially for the class of 2022, the graduating class of 2022 I should say. Today I'm going to be kickstarting a new series in which I am going to look at my top quotes for each of our main characters. I thought it was only fitting that I start today off with Agnes because she is the most important character in the book. So because it is Agnes, I'm going to do things a little bit differently in that I am going to give you 5 quotes that Agnes says and then 5 quotes that are used to describe Agnes. My reason for this is that I love Agnes and I wanted to include every single word that she has ever said because she is my gothic queen, but I decided against it. So I am in no particular order gonna run through my top things that she says and why I love that she says them. Starting us off is on page 34, and that is when Agnes is removed from her cell at Storaborg, and she says, "I could have wept from the relief of light." And I love this so much because it introduces that motif of light that we see all throughout our text, and that is a really strong piece of symbolism that we see all throughout. But it's the first time we really see Agnes showing emotion and allowing us as the audience to understand the severity of this situation in which she is in and the impact that it is having on her for the first time. I also really like the imagery that's here, and I can really imagine what Agnes is feeling as she is exposed to this light and just how much it means to her. This whole paragraph is just beautiful, so I'm just going to humor myself and read it, but it's the last paragraph on page 35, and it says, "How can I say what it was like to breathe again? I felt newborn. I staggered in the light of the world and took deep gulps of fresh air. It was late in the day. The wet mouth of the afternoon was full on my face. My soul blossomed in that brief moment as they led me out of doors. I fell, my skirts in the mud, and I turned my face upwards as if in prayer. I could have wept from the relief of light." Stunning, amazing. I love it so much. My second favorite quote from Agnes is actually on the very next page, and this is when Agnes is leaving that cell at Storaborg and she is coming to terms with what is happening in front of her, and she is grappling with the reception that she's receiving. And I really like this example because it is just stunning. It is a stunning use of a metaphor, it's symbolism, it's a hyperbole, it's a motive language, it's so many different things, and there is so much that I could use with an example like this in my analysis. But as Agnes realizes people are staring at her, she questions it and then she realizes, and she says, "I understood that these people did not see me. I was 2 dead men. I was a burning farm. I was a knife. I was blood." And I love the extremism that goes on with this because it really shows us that she is her crimes. And, you know, if we're looking at any kind of a concept of fate or of redemption or of justice or humanity, anything like that, Agnes isn't a human already. She is her crimes. She is the blood. She is the knife. And I think that that is such profound language and positions the audience to really start to understand the position that Agnes is in. Number 3 is pretty dark, as is almost everything Agnes says, and it is as Agnes is starting to open up to her self-appointed spiritual advisor, Toti, and she starts to tell him exactly what happened in her life. She's telling him her life story, and she's talking about the night that her foster mum passed away in her house as she was giving birth to her child. And this is, for me, one of the most impactful parts of the novel. It catches me every single time. It's just so sad. But the phrase that says, "This is what I tell the Reverend. Death happened in the usual way that it happens, and yet not like anything else." I love this because this use of narrative perspective allows us to get further insight into Agnes. And if I'm looking at a concept like death or survival or anything about Agnes's journey, if I'm looking at her life, then this quote really shows just how horrible her life was. The fact that at such a young age she had this happen to her, and when she reflects on it, she refers to it as death happening in the usual way that it does, telling us that this is something that happens to Agnes quite regularly, which further adds to the audience being positioned to empathize with Agnes and to see just how desolate her life has been. My 4th favorite quote is at the very end of the novel, and it's where we start to see Agnes's mental demise as she really comes to term with her own mortality and realizes that she is extremely close to her execution. And as Kent uses stream of consciousness to show us this, and Agnes makes less and less sense, I also found that she says things that are even more profound than earlier in the text. And the concept of time is something that I really enjoy in this novel. Kent makes such interesting commentary on time, and you know, all of the animalistic metaphors that are used about, you know, Agnes being a lamb waiting for her slaughter, and you know, all of those sorts of things about her just waiting and waiting and waiting to receive her fate, and then all of a sudden she doesn't think she has enough time. And that's such a clash of ideas, and I find that really interesting. And I think that this is best encapsulated with the quote, "I am beyond time," on page 323. I think that that is such an interesting perspective that is offered through this stream of consciousness, that you know, she's beyond time. She is more than that concept. She is so lost that that's what she's thinking, and I really enjoy that. My last favorite quote is maybe one of the saddest, and that is as Agnes is about to be executed and she is receiving what she has always wanted and or she has always needed. She belongs within these people, and they love her and they value her, and Margaret tells Agnes that she's going to be remembered, and perhaps a couple of weeks, days, perhaps even hours earlier, that would have been music to Agnes's ears. That's something that she had spent her whole life trying to find. But she says, "I don't want to be remembered, I want to be here." And that is so emotive, and that, you know, positions the reader to really, I guess, to be quite upset for Agnes and to see the injustice of it. And if I was looking at something like justice, or if I was looking at belonging, or anything to do with the end of Agnes's life and the fact that her life ends in such a capacity, it's just such a strong quote that encapsulates that and describes that. On to my 5 quotes that are said about Agnes. Now, I tried to have a mixture of quotes here that are positive and negative. So disclaimer, just because some of Bjondal's quotes are on my list doesn't mean I like the man. In fact, quite the opposite. But he says some things that I think would be interesting to use in analysis and to tear him apart. Just kidding. We're not going to tear a fictional character apart in our essays. My first one is on page 52, and this is from Margaret. And firstly, this isn't the quote, but I love how she says, "These are not saga times." I love that so much. And as you all know, I love looking at the sagas as a beautiful piece of intertextuality throughout the novel, but I just really like that Margaret says these are not saga times. When Margaret refers to Agnes as a landless workmaid raised on a porridge of moss and poverty, I love that. Not just because I love porridge, but because she's raised on a porridge of moss and poverty. It's so descriptive, and it's such an interesting and striking metaphor that this porridge, so this like clunky, like gluggy kind of combination of events, and it's moss and it's poverty, and it's just not ideal. But also the fact that she is a landless workmaid really shows us that idea of Agnes not belonging at any point in both a literal and a metaphorical sense. Number 2 is a classic, and that is when Toady is doing a bit of digging, doing some research, trying to find out a little bit more about Agnes, and he goes to the church and he meets Dagger, and Dagger describes Agnes as a pauper with a conniving spirit like you'd never seen in a proper maid. Obviously there's a word before that, but I don't want to get demonetized. But this is such a universal quote, and I think that if you're looking at how Agnes is perceived by others in any kind of a way, then this is such a great quote to have to use, because it really showcases the way in which Agnes is perceived. Number 3 is another classic that we talk about all the time that I think could be used in so many different ways, and this is from Bjondal, when he is having a little bit of an altercation with Toady, and he says that Agnes struck him as especially godless during the trial. So that's on page 165. If I'm looking at cultural assumptions of religion, if I'm looking at perception of Agnes, if I'm looking at the way in which she is viewed by her society, then this is a really good quote to use, and it showcases the impact of religion on reputation and on her character and her story. Number 4 is another gross quote from Bjondal. By gross, I mean it's mean, but it is a good quote to use in your analysis. And on page 170, Bjondal says, "She is practiced in deception, and I do not doubt that she has manufactured a life story in such a way so as to prick your sympathy." And I really like that when looking at the character of Toady and how he is able to build that relationship with Agnes and the risks that he took, right? Because we know that Toady values his dad and his religion more than anything else. And by Bjondel, he's an authority figure in his life, as telling him that he's wrong and he's being lied to and he's being manipulated. And Toady standing his ground is such an integral part of the text. But also, practiced in deception implies so much about Agnes and the reputation that she has. And I think that this is another quote that you could use in a magnitude of areas. Last, but of course not least, I could not talk about the ways in which Agnes is referred to without talking about the elephant in the room, and that is Margaret. And when she calls Agnes my girl at the end of the text, it's a classic for a reason. It represents so much. It represents that maternal essence of their relationship, but it also really shows the extent to which Agnes belongs with Margaret, and there's the love that Margaret has for her. In 2 words, it shows so much. And isn't it such a stark contrast to the ways in which Margaret referred to Agnes at the start of the text that we've already looked at in this video? It represents the growth of the characters. It represents their connection. It represents their growth as characters. It is a very, very important and wonderful quote that, lucky for you, is 2 words that you can remember, and I know you all know how to spell, so that's a lot of ticks. So that's the end of today's video. As you can see, I've started annotating burial rites again, so I'm gonna make my next one literally right now. This was so fun. Feel free to make your own, or maybe email me what your favorite quotes Agnes says are. Maybe I'm wrong. If you're not one of my students, write a comment down below. If you are one of my students, then just know that I love you very much. I hope that your studying is doing. I hope your studying is going well, that you are doing well, that you are looking after each other, looking after yourself, and I implore you to get up, get a glass of water, do 5 star jumps, and give yourself a big hug because you're doing amazing. I'll see you very soon. Bye!